Traditionally, you can cook crispy roast pork belly in an oven or deep frying it or one of those new conventional air fryers. And all of those do a great job. But did you know that you can make a really crispy pork belly by pan frying it? Well, now you do, so let's go. So the first thing that you need is a really nice cut of pork belly. You want a cut that is mostly meat and then a nice layer of fat that is not thicker than the meat and a thin skin. You also have to make sure that the meat is relatively flat, okay? Because you want the pork belly to cook evenly when pan frying. So if your pork belly isn't nice and flat like this, then you might need to trim parts of it until it is. And also another tip for pan frying, right? So my pan here is really thin and cheap. It's a non-stick pan and it has a very thin bottom, okay? Now I would actually prefer a frying pan that has a thicker bottom, but this is all I have, so this is all I'm gonna use. So you need a pan that has a lid that fits tightly. So I'm just gonna fill this pan with just enough water to boil the skin. And to this water, I'm gonna add a half a teaspoon of baking soda. And I'm just gonna set my fire on a nice low heat. And I'm gonna add 2 tablespoons of Chinese cooking wine. So the first thing that we have to do is to boil the skin because this makes it easier for me to puncture the skin. So the baking soda will help soften the meat and the Shaoxing wine is to help take off some of that gaminess of the pork. Okay, so when the water starts simmering, drop the pork in skin side down first. And I'm gonna leave it alone like that for 5 minutes. After 5 minutes, just flip it to the other side and leave it alone for another 5 minutes. The water should be gently simmering, so the water shouldn't be too hot, right? All right, so when another 5 minutes are up, move the pork belly to a cutting board. And just use a paper towel to help dry out the pork. And we need to make some strategic cuts. You just want to cut down where the lean meat meets the fat. This will help the marinade as well as keep the meat from curling up during cooking. And then you want to check the skin and remove any hair or some kind of dirt that you see, okay? Because it is important to have a nice clean surface. And then we're going to add a little thin layer of salt to the top of the skin and we just rub it in. And now for a very, very important step, we need to we need to poke holes into the skin. And you need to do this while it's still warm because if the pork skin cools down, it's gonna be a little bit more difficult to poke holes into the skin. And you can use a fork like what I'm doing here. Wooden bamboo skewers work just as fine too. Make sure you get the edges too, okay? Now I know they make these special meat tenderizers. It's basically a bunch of bunched up nails or needles that they use to jam it into the meat. But for me, that's a single-use gadget, but it's also for a good reason because I do a lot of stupid shit. So having one of those things around is just gonna give my wife another lethal option to take me out. So no thanks, I'm just gonna stick with a fork. This step is very important because this step is what creates the nice crackly skin appearance that we see on a nice piece of crispy roast pork. And the more holes, the better. Okay, so once you're confident that there are enough holes, we're gonna wipe down the skin. Just get rid of as much moisture as you can. And I'm just gonna make a rub to marinate the meat side. So there's a 1/4 teaspoon of Chinese 5-spice powder, 1/2 teaspoon of salt, and just a 1/4 teaspoon of sugar. And we just mix it up really well. And then we sprinkle it onto the bottom side of the pork belly. And we're just gonna rub it all around and especially into the cuts that we made. All right, now another very important step. We need some vinegar. The vinegar is also gonna help break down the skin. We just need enough vinegar to cover the bottom of this plate, skin side down into the vinegar. And then we'll leave that alone for about 15 to 20 minutes. Let the vinegar do its work. Okay, so after 20 minutes are up, we're gonna dry the top of the pork skin again. Just discard the vinegar, break out some chopsticks, Just line them up and just set your pork on top. Because right now it is time to leave this in the fridge at least overnight, if not 2 days for the best results, no more than that. So I already done that a few days ago ahead of time, and the skin feels dry to the touch and the meat side is just slightly moist. And once you take it out of the refrigerator, you want to leave it on your countertop for at least 30 minutes to 45 minutes to let this piece of meat come up to room temperature before frying. But before we fry this pork, we just need to add just a tiny bit of vinegar. Just brush it onto the skin. And this is gonna help crisp up the skin. All right, just a tiny bit. And then we top it off with about a 1/4 teaspoon of salt and just rub it in. And we let it sit like this for another 10 minutes. Okay, when my pork is almost ready, I'm gonna set my pan on a high heat. I'm just gonna heat up my pan really hot, and I'm just gonna add enough oil to cover the bottom of the pan. And then before I put my pork in, I'm gonna switch my heat to a very, very low heat, as low as it'll go. I'm gonna wipe dry the skin and the excess salt, and just put the pork down, skin side down. And then I'm gonna cover it. So that's why you need a tight fitting lid. In this way, you're sort of creating an oven effect. So it should take about 30 to 35 minutes to finish this pork, but you should check it about every 5 to 10 minutes to make sure that the pork skin is not burning. And it can burn really easy, and that is why you need to set the fire to as low a setting as possible. Now, if you're doing this for the very first time, I do recommend that you check the bottom of the skin, make sure that it's not browning too fast. And remember to adjust the pan ever so often just to make sure that the pork skin and the meat cooks evenly. Okay, so I've been cooking this for about actually 35 minutes, still on a low heat setting. And we're gonna take a look at the bottom. Oh, check that out. You see the blistering skin? That's what we're looking for. Nice. And then after that, I'm gonna jack the heat up to a low medium because I want to put a nice sear on the sides of the meat. All right, whoa, check that out. Okay, so I know your first instinct is to cut into that meat right now. Big mistake, because right now the meat is still very hot, so there's a lot of juices. So if you cut into it right now, all the juices is just gonna flow out. So I highly recommend waiting at least 10 to 15 minutes, let it cool down, let all the juices get reincorporated into the meat. It's still so juicy. There was just juice just shooting up at me. And I'm just cutting this with one hand, seriously, because I'm holding a camera. And of course, I gotta dip this into hoisin sauce. See, you can make crispy pork belly by pan frying. It is possible, and I just showed you. And if you want to learn 2 classic Thai dishes that uses crispy pork belly, check out this video. So give it a try. And like always, I do make deliveries. I take Bitcoins and Camels as payment. See you all next time.